At first I was planning on not making this video because I hate being seen as the negative guy. I want to be seen as the guy who inspires and shows how fun and interesting it can be to take photos and being a photographer. But then I managed to create a really cool thumbnail. This Grim Reaper with a camera. I think it looks really cool, so I decided I must make the video because people need to see this thumbnail. Anyways, yesterday I visited Fotografiska, the Stockholm Museum of Photography. One of my favorite places to go on a rainy day when I feel uninspired, I want to see something beautiful. If you ever visit Stockholm, you should go there because it's a great museum and they always have some nice exhibitions. And yesterday was no different. The biggest exhibition was by Peter Lindbergh, very talented photographer who has had a very long career. And I was struck by two opposing feelings. The first feeling I felt was that these are really great photos. They are very beautiful and I like this style. The photos are technically perfect. They are high resolution, they are beautiful, they are aesthetically perfect as well. Well composed, interesting poses, interesting emotions. Just perfect photography really. And then the second feeling came to me. If this is perfect, striking photography, why don't I feel anything? Why do I just feel like meh? And I started thinking about this, and I think the reason why I didn't feel much is that we have been drowning in the last 10 years or so in excellent photography. There are so many excellent photos floating around. There are so many thousands of excellent photos being made every day that the kind of photography that was striking and really noteworthy in the 90s is just meh these days. And I don't think that Peter Lindbergh would be able to make a dent in the universe today. He could in the 90s because it was more uncommon with great photography then, but today it's really hard. So in this video I want to list 5 things that I think is the reason for this. 5 things that have killed photography in the last 10 years or so and that are killing photography still. And I want to know, do you agree or not with these 5 things? So the first thing that happened was that digital cameras started to become really good around 2010 somewhere. All of a sudden you could buy a really good digital camera without too much money. It was no longer something that only professional photographers could afford. Now everyone could buy a really good camera, and the difference between a digital and an analog camera is that it's much easier to create great work in big volumes with a digital camera. All of a sudden you have very quick turnaround times and you have the distribution of the internet, we're gonna talk more about that in a moment, that makes it possible to just churn out lots and lots of photos. In the 90s and early 2000s it was harder because you had to rely on analog photography. Not as many people had such cameras and there was always a long turnaround time to get the film developed. But now in the 2010s it was all of a sudden possible to produce great quality photos in large volumes. That brings me to thing number 2 that killed photography. And now all the people who had bought digital cameras, they had a distribution channel. And Instagram became so big and so filled with beautiful photography that photography itself started to lose its value. I mean, in the 90s there were only a handful of really good photographers with good cameras who could churn out work. Now there are all of a sudden hundreds of thousands of really talented photographers who could create beautiful photos. And I'm not saying it's anything wrong with this. It's beautiful and wonderful that we had affordable, good cameras and a great distribution channel such as Instagram. But the effect of this was that it became so much harder to stand out as a photographer. And then thing number 3 happened. As Instagram was growing rapidly and digital cameras was in many enthusiasts' hands, smartphone cameras also started to become really good, and that development is still ongoing. And I recently bought one of the new iPhone 15s, and I was struck by how incredibly easy it is to take beautiful photos. Now on these new iPhones you can even change the focus point after the fact, and you can change the aperture as well. Of course this is done by AI and computational photography, but the result looks very believable. Now it's all of a sudden very hard to distinguish fake bokeh from real bokeh. So smartphone cameras have become so good and they are in everyone's pocket, making photography even more abundant and great photography even more abundant. All of a sudden almost anyone can take beautiful photos, doesn't require that much skill anymore, and it's even harder to stand out as a photographer. And thing number 4 that has happened in the last 20 years or so is that newspapers and magazines are no longer a viable business model. Even magazines such as National Geographic are ending their print runs and now moving online. And yes, most newspapers that existed in the 90s, they still exist, but mostly as online newspapers, and it's really hard for them to survive because the transition from papers to digital papers did not really go that well in terms of monetization. Newspapers don't make nearly as much money as they did in the 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s. Now most newspapers and magazines are really struggling. It's not a business model that works as well anymore. And an effect of that is that most newspapers and magazines cannot afford to have staff photographers. So the photographer as an occupation is not as high status or valuable anymore. Sure, there are still fashion photographers who make good money, but there are far fewer of them. And National Geographic photographers, that is kind of a dying breed, unfortunately. The 5th thing is, of course, AI. In my last video I showed some recent development in AI, how you can be even more creative and create even more realistic photographs with AI. And it's only been a year since we started seeing things such as DALL-E, and in that year so much has happened. So now it's starting to become hard to distinguish AI-made photos from real photos, and I bet that in just 2 years or so it will be absolutely impossible to distinguish a real photograph from a computer-generated one. And this is sad in a way. I mean, I'm excited for AI and all the possibilities that it brings, but I'm sad for photography. Because a big part of, I think, the motivation for people to become photographers is to practice a craft and a skill. In the 90s, when we only had really dumb cameras, it was hard to take beautiful photos, such as Peter Lindbergh's ones. It was hard to take photos like that because the equipment was so limited. But nowadays it's so easy, not only with the modern digital cameras and the smartphone cameras, but now also with AI. Now with AI you don't even need to have a sense of aesthetics anymore, because that's kind of baked into the AI models. Today on Twitter I saw someone complaining about a new photo service, a new photo sharing app that allowed AI photos, and I understand that angle, because when you look at these AI photos, They are so beautiful so that even the most skilled photographer in the perfect settings at the perfect location could not really match that, because the AI is so much better than a human already at creating visually pleasing, aesthetically pleasing photos. So what's the point of being a photographer if you cannot match what a computer can do in just a minute? Yeah, that's a good question, right? And I still don't have the answer for this. I still think it's fun to go out taking photos, but I'm worried. I'm worried about photography. And I feel that maybe photography will not ever die as a hobby and as a craft, but I feel like we're kind of being pushed into this corner where it gets harder and harder to find the motivation and find the inspiration to do photography. And I'm not sure where we will end up. Do you know, or do you have ideas about where all this is going? Please comment below, because I need to discuss this with someone, and that someone is you. So please let me know what you think, and will you continue doing photography or not? And what's your thinking here? Thank you for watching this video, and I promise that the next one will be on a more positive note, perhaps a photo walk. I really hope for that. The weather is so bad today, but I have my bag prepared to go out whenever the weather gets a little bit better. I know it's been a while since I did a photo walk video, and I'm pumped to do that very soon again. So I'll see you in the next video.